Okay, welcome back everyone to Grockit's OGTV. My name's Jim Jacobson and you're watching the GMAT edition. We're going through the 12th edition of the guide to the test, the one with the purple cover. And we are going from one purple cover, one end of the purple cover to another. And we're in the middle of the reading comprehension section. Actually, it's more towards the end of the reading comprehension section. This time we're going to pick up on page 392. And on question 91. So we're actually going to, we're following the same format, but this may be your first time tuning in. Just briefly then, I give you a few minutes to read the passage on the assumption that you have this book in front of you. It doesn't really do that much good. Well, I don't think it would do any good to have me just read you a passage. That's nothing like what reading comprehension would be like on the test. Because of course you're reading it to yourself. Far better would be for you to read it, for me to read it, take notes. We can't really compare notes. I can't see what you did. And of course, you're not obligated to take notes, but then we go through the questions together. So we're going to go through two passages today and the questions that go with them. And yeah, that's the format we're going to use. So go ahead and start with the passage on page 392. Okay, let's stop there and hit the questions. So again, as always, it's a good idea to ask ourselves whether the author has a particular opinion that he or she is trying to convince us of, something that the author believes that we should do, that we should believe, or that the government or parents or some group or person should do. So some of the passages are kind of persuasive, others are more explanatory. And this one, to my mind anyway, is basically explanatory. It explains what this guy Duverger wrote and back in 1955, and how his approach has continued to endure, and yet how it has some flaws. So, no author persuasion here. So, let's hit the questions and see what we get. So number 91, the primary purpose of the passage is to, and so again we want something that doesn't have the author trying to convince us of anything. A, evaluate a research study. Well, that actually sounds pretty good. The first paragraph is about the original study, the second paragraph about its legacy, so we'll keep that one as an option. Choice B, summarize the history of a research area. Well, we definitely, it's not an entire research area by any means, and my pen has stopped working. Hang on a second. Let's see if that does it. Come on. Well, I'll keep talking while I keep working on it. So choice B, summarize the history of a recent research area. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense because we don't actually have a research area. It's really just a single study, and it doesn't really summarize the history of it. It talks about its origin, and that's about it. So it's not B. C, report new research findings. We don't have new research findings. There's a hint, of course, that new research has come in the section where it talks about how Duverger's findings are not necessarily still current, but that's kind of just hinted at, and certainly not the primary purpose of the passage. D, reinterpret old research findings. Again, there's not a reinterpretation. It's admitted that they took place in 1955 and are therefore not necessarily current. And then E, reconcile conflicting research findings. So there's no reconciliation and there's no conflict, so that really can't be right. And the pen still does not want to write. That's less good. Okay, well, let's move on. So the answer choice is actually A. I'll do this with the mouse, and I may have to forgo taking notes on the passage if this is what happens. I'll keep working on it later, but luckily we can still do the rest of the questions on this one because I still have the mouse pad. So, question number 92. According to the passage, Duverger's study was unique in 1955 in that it something. So we go back to the part where we find out what he did in 1955. It's the first this is line 2, the first behavioralist multinational comparison of women's electoral participation ever to use election data and survey data together. So that sounds like what it was unique, how it was unique in 1955. Let's find that in the answers. A, included both election data and survey data. Well, that sounds pretty awesome. We'll give that a preliminary check mark for the awesome right answer. Choice B, gathered data from sources never before used in political studies. The implication actually is that election data and survey data had been used before individually, but not together, so it's not B. But individually they had been used before, so it's not that he used a never before used source. Choice C, included an analysis of historical processes. Nope, no historical processes whatsoever. There are historical processes mentioned, and that's what perhaps might attract someone to choice C. Historical processes are mentioned in line 17. It says, moreover, to Duverger's credit, he placed his findings in the context of many of the historical processes that had shaped these activities. But that's not what was exciting about his work in 1955. And certainly not what was unique. So choice D, examine the influence on voting behavior of the relationships between men, women, and men. And that's actually something that was pointed out that he was missing from his discussion. So that was considered one of the weaknesses, or is considered one of the weaknesses. That's definitely not what he did. And then E, analyzed not only voting and political candidacy, but also other political activities. Candidacy, no, not in there. So answer choice A is in fact our right answer, the one that we first thought was great. We'll move on to number 93. Take me a little bit longer to erase without the pen. 93. Which of the following characteristics of a country is most clearly an example of a factor that Duverger, as described in the passage, failed to consider in his study? And in my notes, I basically listed them because it sounded like whenever they list things like this in a passage, there's a pretty good chance that the questions will come back to that in some context. Something like this in an all of the following except, or in this case, this isn't an all of the following except. This is just pick the one that matches one of these three. So clearly an example of a factor that he failed to consider, we need either something relating to political regimes, economic factors, or the political and social relationships between men and women. So A, a large population. That's not any of those things. That's an X, believe me. B, a predominantly Protestant population. Certainly possible in Europe, but that's neither a political regime nor an economic factor nor political and social relations. That's more religion. C, a predominantly urban population. Again, demography is not in the picture here. D, one-party government. So a one-party government is a political regime, so that sounds pretty good. And then E, location in the heart of Europe. Geography, not a factor. So that leaves us with choice D, a one-party government. Political regimes were something that Duverger failed to consider. And again, my apologies that it's taking so long. I have to do this with the trackpad, which is always an adventure. There are probably people who are so used to it that they can write pretty well on these things, but I'm not one of them, not yet anyway, and I'd just as soon not become one. It's easier to write with a pen. Anyway, question number 94. The author implies that Duverger's actual findings are, so we did see something about his actual findings. Let's see. We find, so at the end of the first paragraph, it says Duverger's research findings were that women voted somewhat less frequently than men, the difference narrowing the longer women had the vote, and were slightly more conservative. We also find out in the second paragraph, it says that Duverger's approach has proved more durable than his actual findings. So those are the two places his findings were mentioned. Let's see if something like that appears in the answers. A, were his findings limited because they focus on only 4 countries? No. I mean, of course, that is a limit placed on them, but if anything, the tone of the passage is that that it was amazing that he did 4 countries. It was a multinational comparison, so that's hardly a limit. I mean, it is a limit, but not in the way that this implies. B, does the author imply that they were inaccurate in their description of the 4 countries in the early 1950s? No. The implication is that the findings did not stay true. That's that second thing that I read. But that's not to imply that the original findings were inaccurate. So it's not B. That his actual findings are out of date in that they are inapplicable to the 4 countries today. So that actually sounds like the thing we read second, where his approach was more durable than his findings, which means what was true, the things that he found to be true, didn't stay true. They didn't last. They weren't durable. They didn't endure. So C sounds good. D, were his findings flawed because they are based on unsound data? Nothing like that. There is no criticism of his data. And E, biased by Duverger's political beliefs. Also, I don't think that's it. Also, I guess I should mention, I am well aware that I may be mispronouncing his name. It just looks kind of like a French name, so I decided to pronounce it that way. So don't take me on the authority on how to pronounce everything. I do look up the pronunciation of scientific terms I'm not familiar with before I do this broadcast, or if I see a vocabulary word that I didn't know before, so I don't sound like an idiot. But I can't guarantee that his name was actually pronounced Duverger. Just a good guess. Anyway, oh, and we actually were still on page 393. That's what I get for doing too much talking. We are on question 95. Worst 5 ever. Okay. The passage implies that, in comparing 4 European countries, Duverger found that the voting rates of women and men were most different in the country in which women what? So remember that his findings were that women voted slightly less, and that was at the end of the first paragraph. Whoa, hey, my pen's back in a awkward way. Okay. So women voted less. We also find out so that was at the end of the first paragraph where it says Duverger's research findings were that women voted somewhat less frequently than men, the difference narrowing the longer women had the vote. Because, of course, originally in no countries in Europe did women have the vote, and they got it at different points. So the implication being that the longer it had been since women's suffrage, that the more likely women were to vote. And so the voting differences should be greatest in the country where women got the vote most recently. A little bit of logic there. So let's look for that in the answer choices. The voting rates of women and men were most different in the country in which women, A, were most politically active. That doesn't even make sense. B, ran for office most often. Also doesn't make sense. C, held the most conservative political views. That is mentioned, but it's a separate issue. D, had the most egalitarian relations with men. Egalitarian means equal. That's closer to true, but what we're really after is E, had possessed the right to vote for the shortest time. Women voted least in places where they had been voting for the least amount of time. So it is answer choice E. And I'm going to get rid of, I don't know why it does that line like that when it comes back in. Just lucky, I guess. But, Pen, I am glad to have you back. Please don't leave us again. We need you. Okay. And lastly, question number 96. I'm talking to my pen. That's great. Anyway, the author implies that some behavioralist research involving the multinational study of women's political participation that followed Duverger's study did which of the following? So where did we find out about subsequent behavioralist studies? That was in the second paragraph. And we found out, for example, that his approach endured. So people still used his approach later. What else do we find out? At the end of the second paragraph, it says, given this failure, Duverger's study foreshadowed the enduring limitations of the behavioralist approach to the multinational study of women's political participation. His study foreshadowed the enduring limitations. So the limitations that the passage mentions on Duverger's approach, those were inherited by the subsequent behavioralist, multinational, women's participation things. So it sounds like probably they failed to consider the same factors: political regimes, economic factors, and the political and social relations between men and women. Let's look for something like that in the answer choices. A, they ignored Duverger's approach. Well, no, that's in fact the opposite of what we're after there. That's, it sounds like they kept his approach and had some other problems. B, suffered from faults similar to those in Duverger's study. Again, that's that phrase, enduring limitations. The limitations of his approach endured beyond his actual study, which means other people did the same thing. Oh, this should be an X, not a check mark. Choice B sounds good. C, focused on political activism? No. Focused on the influence of political regimes? No. Although that's one of the things that Duverger didn't do, so if we were skimming and saw that phrase, that one might be appealing. And E, focused on the political and social relations between women and men. Again, that's another thing that Duverger didn't do, and the studies that followed him likewise did not do. Okay, so we are now done with the passage on whatever this was on. Behavioralist studies, multinational behavioralist studies using poll and voting data for women's participation and stuff. Okay. See, and this is actually a good lesson. If you're able, as much as possible, once you've reviewed your passages, after you've looked over, read all the explanations to everything you either got wrong or had to guess or just weren't sure why the answer you chose was right, you should probably just put it out of your mind. If it ended up being a really intriguing passage, you can reward yourself by saying, hey, wow, that was really interesting. I want to go read more about behavioralist approaches to women studying women's participation. If it doesn't interest you, just let it go, clear your mind. Don't even try to remember what it was because you need to be focused on the next question and the next passage in this particular case. So now we are on page 392 with a cooperative pen. It's much faster for me to write, and we are going to, oh no, we're not on page 392. I didn't turn the page. Oops. We are on page 394, question number 97. And this is a longer passage. I'm definitely going to give you the full 4 minutes, may go a little bit more, to make sure that you have time to read all of it because it's a long passage and we have 6 questions on it. So it's worth your time, worth the time investment to understand it well. Okay, 4 minutes or so, starting now. Okay, we'll stop there. I kind of lost track of. I probably should start writing the time down on the up here so I remember how many minutes is going to be 4 minutes. Anyway, a long passage with several lists within it, and it is entirely your option whether you choose to actually record what those lists of things are. It's relatively time consuming to do it. On the other hand, it helps encode it in your brain, and it's easier to fish it out than to go back and reread that part of the passage repeatedly. We don't know how many questions, on the real GMAT, you don't know how many questions you're going to get. You don't know whether any of the questions you'll get are actually going to deal with these lists. However, if they do, this is a big time saver. So it's kind of up to you. If nothing else, it would have been very important to alternately just if you are a note taker and you didn't want to list, the elements of the classical model, that you might say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 steps. You might mention in your notes that there were 6 steps mentioned so that if it comes back to it, you remember that there are 6 and you can go back and read for them. Same thing here, the 5 uses of intuition. When I read this passage, it really looked to me just from reading the passage, the way that they describe it, the 5 uses of intuition were probably going to be more important because they get more detail. Some of them take up more than just one phrase or even more than just one sentence, whereas the classical model that of decision making, of management decision making, is all just jammed into one sentence as kind of a reminder to people. It's it's there, written as if the expectation is that the people reading will be familiar with this model of decision making, and so it's just kind of reminding people. Anyway, in this particular case, I chose to write it out because, I don't know, I'm trying to be thorough on the notes to show what sorts of things you could write down. Note that I did still get all of this written down in the time period, but partially that's because I can read pretty quickly. So if you are a slower reader, writing notes in this level of detail is probably... Well, try it out. I guess that's my recommendation, is try it out in some untimed practice and see whether it impacts your accuracy in the questions at all. Because at least 2 people that I've worked with have actually seen huge, 30% jumps in accuracy, actually, going from a non-note taking to a note taking model, one where they read thoroughly, take notes. One guy even would pre-read the passage, just read the first and last sentence of each paragraph, then go through with note taking, and again, he saw giant increase in accuracy. It's not for everybody, but for some people, it's the lock that the key that easily opens the lock on the door. So your mileage may vary. I'm illustrating how to do it this way. There's not really a way to illustrate not taking notes. This would just be, imagine that this is all white over here, and we were just tackling the passage based on our memory. So anyway, on to the question. Question number 97. According to the passage, senior managers use intuition in all of the following ways except. Okay, so this is an instance where having these 5 uses of intuition turned out to be handy. Speed up the creation of a solution to a problem. That's number 5, so it's not A. B, identify a problem. That's number 1. C, bring together disparate facts. Disparate means different. That's 3, synthesizing the big picture. So it's not C. Stipulate clear goals. Stipulating clear goals is mentioned in the passage, but that's step 1 of the classical model, and the intuition guys and women do not use that. So that looks pretty good for D. And then E, evaluate possible solutions to a problem. Evaluating possible solutions is basically both 4 and 5. Evaluating the solution relative to different answers, and as well as quickly arriving at a solution. So it's both 4 and 5, and therefore it's not E, since it is one of the things that intuition people do. So it is answer choice D. On to number 98. The passage suggests which of the following about the writers on management mentioned in line 12. whenever you get something like that, really, I mean, you could do it from memory, but it takes so little time to go back and read that specific line citation, it almost always makes the question 10 times easier. No, I didn't really quantify that with experimentation, but it seems like it's 10 times easier. It's at least twice as easy. So, line 12. Generations of writers on management have recognized that some practicing managers rely heavily on intuition. In general, however, such writers display a poor grasp of what intuition is. Some see it as the opposite of rationality, others view it as an excuse for capriciousness. Capriciousness means following your whims, following just doing whatever you feel like doing. So basically, the passage suggests which of the following about writers on management. It sounds like the passage suggests they don't know what they're talking about when it comes to intuition. Let's find that in the answer choices. A, they have criticized managers for not following the classical rational model of decision analysis. So this sounds close. Well, you know, we'll keep this one. That's a maybe. Because we do find out about, you know, that some writers talk about it as an excuse for capriciousness, which is probably not a good quality in business decision making. I mean, you know, luck will leading to your decisions being right occasionally, but so this could be a criticism. B, they have not based their analyses on sufficiently large sample of actual managers. That's nowhere in there. C, they have relied on drawing their conclusions on what managers say rather than on what managers do. Potentially true, but not supported by the passage. D, they have misunderstood how managers use intuition in making business decisions. This one also sounds good. And E, they have not acknowledged the role of intuition in managerial practice. Well, they all talk about intuition, so it's not that they haven't acknowledged the role, it's not that. Let's choose between A and D now. So again, it says, such writers display a poor grasp of what intuition is. Right. So is it that they, A, criticize managers for not following the classical rational model, or D, misunderstood how managers use intuition in making business decisions? So having a poor grasp of something is the same as not understanding something fully. So, and there's nothing about that they should be using the classical rational model instead. So that allows us to eliminate answer choice A and change D to kind of a happy face. That really looks more like a crazy face, but it's the right answer anyway. So answer choice D. We change pages and questions, and I erase my doodling. All right, so we are now on page 395. Question number 99. Which of the following best exemplifies an aha experience, mentioned in line 30, as it is presented in the passage? One of these, we always have to go back and look. So line 30. A third function of intuition is to synthesize isolated bits of data and practice and into an integrated picture, often in an aha experience. So that was number 3 on the list, synthesizing the big picture use of intuition. So let's find that in the answer choices. A manager risks taking an action whose outcome is unpredictable to discover whether the action changes the problem at hand. So that does happen in the passage. That's paragraph 4, though. That's not what the aha moment relates to. So this is one of those things where if you don't go back and check the bit on the aha moment, you'd say, oh yeah, I remember reading about managers taking action to further analyze the problem. And you'd be right in remembering that, but you'd be wrong in thinking that it related to the aha moment. So it is not answer choice A. B, a manager performs well-learned and familiar behavior patterns in creative and uncharacteristic ways to solve a problem. So performing learned patterns quickly was number 2 on the list of uses of intuition, not number 3, which was synthesizing the big picture. So that's, again, for a non-careful reader, they might have read the performing learned patterns quickly and then skimmed and saw, oh, and then aha gets mentioned. So that's it, but they'd be wrong. C, a manager suddenly connects seemingly unrelated facts and experiences to create a pattern relevant to the problem at hand. So that sounds like synthesizing a big picture. Let's keep answer choice C. D, a manager rapidly identifies the methodology used to compile data yielded by systematic analysis. That, I have no idea where that came from. That's, nothing like any of the uses of intuition, so that's not right. E, a manager swiftly decides which of several sets of tactics to implement in order to deal with the contingencies suggested by a problem. So that's number 5 in the list of uses of intuition. So, this was paragraph 4, this was number 2, this one was number 3, this one was, who knows where that came from, and then this one was number 5. And was wrong. So answer choice C is our correct answer. On to the big 100. A milestone. An arbitrary milestone because we use a base 10 counting system. But a milestone nonetheless. Okay, number 100. According to the passage, the classical model of decision analysis includes all of the following except. Now, if I hadn't written down these 6 steps, we would want to go back and reread that section, or maybe just, put your finger next to it on the screen so you can go back and compare each of these answer choices with what's actually listed in the passage. Since I have it in the notes, I will probably use my notes. On the real GMAT, it would probably, I'm just thinking, in these cases, I think I would probably be more comfortable just putting my finger next, making sure that if, with a passage this long, making sure that I'm scrolled up so that this is visible on the screen, and then just keeping my finger next to, if the computer setup allows me to do so, keep my finger next to where these are listed, and because of course the question is in the adjacent column, and it would be slightly quicker to look at the passage than to look down at my notes. But I guess it would kind of depend on over how much paragraph real estate the elements of the classical model were listed. If it took an entire paragraph to list all of them, the notes would definitely be the faster way. Like as it was with the uses of intuition. This 5-element list, much easier to skim than the actual section on it in the passage. Anyway, a little bit of strategy there. Answer choice A. Classical model doesn't include evaluation of a problem. Well, we have assess problem, so that's in there. And that's not the answer. B. Creation of possible solutions to a problem. That's formulate options. That's B, not B. Establishment of clear goals to be reached by the decision. That's the first step, clarifying goals, not C. Action undertaken in order to discover more information about a problem. That's actually intuition managers, and that's what we find out about in paragraph 4. So that's not in the classical model, that's in the intuition model, according to Eisenberg's 5 uses of intuition and what the author says. So that's pretty good. And let's check E. Comparison of the probable effects of different solutions to a problem. That was the estimate the chances thing. So it's not E, it is definitely D for number 100. Okay, so we move on to 101. All right. It can be inferred from the passage that which of the following would most probably be one major difference in behavior between manager X, who uses intuition to reach decisions, and manager Y, who uses only formal decision analysis. And just kind of a quick scan of the answer choices looks like it says manager X does this one thing and manager Y does another. And so in order for this to be right, manager X, who's the intuition manager, will need to use one of these things. X needs to be here, and Y needs to be up here for it to be the right answer. So let's see what we get. A, manager X analyzes first and then acts. Manager Y does not. So analyzing first and then acts is the formal decision analysis, which is what Y is supposed to be doing, not X. So choice A is in fact 180 degrees the opposite of what we're after. It has reversed their roles. Choice B, Manager X checks possible solutions to a problem by systematic analysis. Manager Y does not. Again, this is assuming we've read the question wrong and attributes the classical model to X and the intuition model to Y when it is the question's asking for the other way around. C, Manager X takes action in order to arrive at the solution to a problem. Manager Y does not. So this doesn't appear in the 5 uses of intuition, but remember that's what this paragraph 4 was, that the intuition managers will sometimes do something just to see what happens to formulate their understanding of the problem. That sounds like what Manager X might do and Manager Y might not do. We'll keep it. D, Manager Y draws on years of hands-on experience in creating a solution to a problem. Manager X does not. You know, I think this one's kind of neutral because both the classical model person and the intuition model person would both use their years of experience to come up with their options. It's just that the intuition person doesn't use the formal model of decision making. They just immediately go with what their years of experience say, whereas the analysis person would list it among their options. So, yeah, this one's neutral and therefore not a clear what it would want. Most probably be one major difference in behavior. And this probably wouldn't be a difference in behavior. They'd both be using their years of experience. Choice E, Manager Y depends on day-to-day tactical maneuvering. Manager X does not. Now, it's certainly possible that Manager Y could use the classical decision-making model to do day-to-day maneuvering, and Manager X doesn't, if Manager X just doesn't have day-to-day stuff to deal with. But really, it should be, if anything, it's going to be Manager X who thinks by acting, and therefore, if anything, choice E is another 180-degree opposite, where we've attributed the qualities of an intuition manager to the classical manager for the question, so it's not E. So it is C. Manager X takes action in order to arrive at the solution to a problem. Manager Y does not. Okay, last one. I didn't skip any, did I? No, I didn't. I did that once in a previous broadcast. Completely skipped over a quantitative question. Luckily I caught it, but anyway. It's one of the risks. Going from the book, I could just get too excited about getting done with the passage and move on too quickly. Alright, so number 102. Last one on this passage and last one for this broadcast. The passage provides support for which of the following statements? So, with the way this question, so very often with the way questions are worded, you will have plenty of, or you'll have some evidence for where you should check the passage. You'll notice I've done that even in the course of this passage where, you know, there's something in the question stem that triggers a quick scan of the relevant section of the paragraph. This one, the passage provides support for which of the following statements? There's literally nothing we can do other than look at the statements. So that's what we're going to do. So A, does the passage provide support for the statement, managers who rely on intuition are more successful than those who rely on formal decision analysis? Well, so the opening of the passage does say that the majority of successful senior managers do not closely follow the classical rational model of blah, 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 blah. However, most of them not doing it doesn't mean that none of them do. It also does not mean that those who follow the intuition model are more successful, however you measure success. It just means that more of the successful ones do it. The most successful one could be a human computer of the classical, decision analysis model. We have no idea, and so there's not sufficient support in the passage for answer choice A. B, can it support that managers cannot justify their intuitive decisions? And again, the passage says something like this, that people who follow this intuition model often have difficulty explaining how they arrived at their conclusion because it's intuition rather than a formal analysis. But it's not that they cannot justify it, just that it's difficult for them, or that it's often difficult for them. So again, that one's really not supported by the passage either. C, managers' intuition works contrary to their rational and analytical skills. Not true, because in fact, number 4 in the uses of intuition was as a check against the answer arrived at by the rational decision-making model. So some of these senior managers who use intuition use it as a way of, as a parallel process to the rational decision model. So again, you know, the senior managers don't necessarily use all 5 of these. Some of them probably only use 1, but they're successful because of it. So no, it is not at odds with or contrary to the rational and analytical model. D, logical analysis of a problem increases the number of possible solutions. I'm not actually sure how they came up with this wrong answer choice. Because, I guess, because a lot of times wrong answer choices are developed from bits of text from the passage that are meant to tempt people who didn't read very carefully, who do a lot of skimming. In this particular case, logical analysis of a problem increases the number of possible solutions. The number of evaluating a number of solutions is more explicitly an element of the logical analysis model, but it is still part of the intuitive process where they quickly move to a solution. That is to say, they don't spend a lot of time evaluating all the different options, but they're still there in the intuitive model. So it really can't be D. So process of elimination gives us E, but you know, just to be safe, because we want to get as many questions right on the GMAT as possible, and it doesn't take that long to read another answer choice if you don't have to talk about it to the internet, let's check answer choice E. So intuition enables managers to employ their practical experience more efficiently. Well, if time is money, and if time is some measure of efficiency, which by most standards it is, the fact that the number 2 on the list and number 5 on the list both involve the manager using the intuitive model moving to some kind of action more quickly, it is pretty clear that intuition enables managers to employ their practical experience more efficiently. So as opposed to going through the steps, an intuitive person can still follow this classical model, but ultimately they're going to arrive at the same conclusion in a shorter time with intuition. So same product, shorter time is greater efficiency. Therefore, answer choice E is the correct one. Okay, so we'll stop there. I'm just going to check the Facebook page quickly here, make sure there aren't any comments about stuff, junk, or things. It's just going to take me a second to log in there. Again, you are not obligated to write comments on the video page, but you are welcome to, and eventually I will look at them. There's my video on the screen. Well, hard to tell whether either of those are written for me, because I think this is the page for all the sessions. But oh no, I guess it's probably the GMAT one. Anyway, yes, hello. Okay, so no other feedback. So we will pick up next time with the next reading comprehension passage. We are going to start on page 396 with question number 103, and we are almost done with reading comprehension. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 more passages, and at the rate of 1 or 2 per day, we should be done this week. Let's see, is that right? Well, I'm actually going to be taking a couple days off this week, but we'll be finishing within a week. We'll go with that. And yeah, so tune in next time and hope to see you there. And thanks for joining us. This has been Grockit's OGTV GMAT edition. We're going through the 12th edition of the guide, and my name's Jim Jacobson.